Hi, everybody. I want to show you a little bit about the kind of information that's available online where you can look at real-time river data and see where water levels are high and low. So this is a website that's hosted by the US Geological Survey, and you can see that there's this national map on this part with all of these dots on it. And the dots are actually each dot is representing a gauging station across the country. And overall, the colors, they're color coded where they're compared to the historic data at each site. So blue and black means it's higher than typical water flows. Green is pretty close to average, and oranges and reds mean that there's a little bit less than normal water at those gauging stations. What I'm going to do is show you around um, how to look at the different types of data that are available here. I'm going to use a site in Maine, but you can, when you're answering this assignment, you can pick any gauging station that you want across the country. Just be aware that you have to think about like each of these is reflecting a pretty different environment. So whether or not it's going to show something that's easy to interpret may or may not be true. I'm going to click on Maine, and this is going to bring us into the state page. This is current water data for Maine. Most of these locations are updating every 15 minutes or so. Um, we're here, this is Franklin County. You can see that there's one station just outside of Franklin County and one station on the Sandy River in Franklin County. Um, so, you know, there aren't a ton around. There are a few more in other places. Most of these have to do with power regulation, which is one of the reasons that we don't. The Sandy River is no longer dammed. It's an unimpeded river, so it doesn't get a ton of monitoring. Um, if you're interested in data on a site, you can see when I mouse over this, it gives you a little bit of a summary. But if you're interested in seeing the full data, you click on the dot and it will bring you to the site. And there's a lot of verbiage at the top. Just keep on keeping on. Scroll down. For some reason, they also measure air temperature, and the first thing that you see at each of these sites. I'm not especially interested in that. What I want to talk about is the hydrograph. So here's the discharge at this site. This is, it automatically shows you just the past week. And the blue line is showing you the discharge in CFS over the past week. So it started out at about 2000 CFS, went down, and now it's back up. The yellow triangles down here are the median, you can see it down here, the median daily value. And that's based on 83 years of record, which is how long they've had a gauging station here. So that's pretty good. It's a pretty decent length of record. So that means that when we're looking at typically around this time of year, the discharge would be running at 800. And you can see in late March, it always starts to climb up a little bit. And that's what you'd expect to see with snow melt. Um, and right now, you can see all week we've been running a little bit higher than typical. So this is the hydrograph that shows discharge versus time. Let me scroll down and show you gauge height or stage. So this is the actual height of the river versus time. And you can see it mimics the pattern of the discharge where it was up and then it went down through the week and then it's gone back up again. So you would normally expect to see these tracking each other pretty well. Let me show you a couple of other things that you can do. So it always defaults to showing you just a week's worth of data. But if we go all the way back up to this dialog box at the top where it says number of days, you can actually put in another value. So I'm just going to type in 30 and hit go. And it's going to reload this page with a full month of data. Temperature. And now here's the discharge record. Again, this is for the Sandy River, a little bit downstream of campus. And this is going to be typical for a lot of Maine. They won't report this blue line here. It says it's affected by ice. They won't report a discharge value while the gauging station is iced in. So, so they won't report that. So the ice just went out at this gauging station in the past week or so, and the discharge came up. But we can actually tell, we know that the stage or the gauge height, the second chart, follows the same pattern, and that gets reported whether there's ice or not. So what's really interesting when we look at the Sandy River now at this location, we can see that back in mid-March, right before everybody left campus, and it was really warm, there was actually a big peak flow. That was the highest water level that we've seen in the past month. So uh, that's an interesting thing to look at, and I'm going to be asking you to look at not just the past week, but also the past month at the station that you choose. And the other thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to compare stations. And in order to do that, we're going to add the location code for another station in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the page with the map, and I'm going to look at upstream on the Sandy River over here. So you can see these little gray lines on here are connecting the rivers. I'm going to go to this upstream on the Sandy River. That's this gauge station, and I'm just going to copy that code and then go back, go over to the downstream site we've been looking at, and I'm going to put in this new code over here and say go. And now what it's doing is that it's showing me a comparison in the gauge heights for the last couple weeks. So this is um, the downstream one has actually been a little bit lower, and the upstream one has been a little bit higher. Let's look at it for the past month. So let me put that 30-day value back in here. And when this loads, I'm going to show you a way to zoom in on these plots to get a little bit more information. So this is kind of cool because now you can see here's that mid-March peak that we were looking at just a couple minutes ago for downstream on the Sandy. And you can see that there was a similar one at the upstream gauge, but if we're interested, we can actually look at this in more detail. So I can take this red bar, click down on my screen, and drag it across to look at just this window in more detail. And now you can do things like you can mouse over and see the timing of that peak compared to the timing of this peak. So you can get some pretty good information about how these pulses of water are actually moving through the watershed from this site. And that's pretty useful for thinking about flooding and flood forecasting.